One phone call. That was all it would take to end everything. Darnell Clark had spent 6 years building alone. He didn't know that yet. Not standing there in the parking lot behind Rideau Hall with his coat zipped to the chin and his breath curling white into the Ottawa night. Not with the temperature sitting at -19 and the wind cutting east off the river like it had a personal grudge. All Darnell knew at that particular moment, at 11:47 p.m., on a Friday in January, was that his department head was sitting on a concrete parking barrier in a cocktail dress. No coat, one shoe missing, and she was about to freeze. The faculty holiday party, pushed back 3 weeks because of a budget meeting nobody wanted to remember, had been winding down for the past hour inside Laurier House, the old limestone building the university kept for events they wanted to feel important. Darnell had been there since 4 in the afternoon, supervising the setup. His custodial team had hauled in the extra tables, strung the lights the events coordinator insisted on, taped down the cables for the sound system, and laid the mats at every entrance because the forecast called for freezing rain. He was supposed to leave at 9. He had told Angela, his neighbor, his emergency everything, that he'd pick up Wren by 9:30. It was nearly midnight now. The delay was his own fault, partly. 2 of his crew had called in sick, which meant Darnell stayed to handle breakdown himself. He didn't mind. Overtime was overtime, and Wren's ski trip with her school was coming up, and new ski pants for a 7-year-old who grew like a weed cost more than they had any right to. So he stayed. He swept the main hall, broke down the bar station, hauled the recycling out back, and was loading the last bin into the cage when he saw her. Dr. Meredith Lawson, Associate Dean of Social Sciences. His boss's boss's boss, technically, though in practice they rarely spoke. She was the one who signed off on the custodial department's budget every April. She was the one who had approved his promotion to supervisor 2 years ago, though Darnell doubted she remembered the paperwork. To her, he was a name on an org chart 3 levels down. Maybe not even that. Maybe just the man who made sure the floors were clean before her Monday morning lectures. She was sitting on the barrier with her arms wrapped around herself, shivering so hard it looked like convulsions. Her clutch bag was open on the ground beside her, its contents scattered. Lipstick, a transit pass, a cracked phone screen reflecting nothing. Darnell stopped the bin mid-roll, looked around. The parking lot was empty except for 3 cars. The windows of Laurier House were dark. Everyone else had gone. Dr. Lawson? She looked up. Her eyes took a moment to focus. When they did, there was no recognition in them. Just confusion, and cold, and something underneath that Darnell would later recognize as fear, though not the kind directed at him. The unfocused, directionless fear of someone who doesn't know exactly where they are or how they got there. "Hey," he said, softer. "It's Darnell. Darnell Clark. I work in facilities." "Facilities," she repeated, like the word was in a language she was still learning. "Yeah, we met at the... Listen, you're going to get hypothermia out here. Can I call someone for you? A cab? A friend?" She blinked, looked at the scattered contents of her purse as if seeing them for the first time. "My phone," she said. "It died. I was going to call Sheena Battisti from the English department." Darnell knew Sheena vaguely. They'd exchanged hellos at the Remembrance Day ceremony in November. She and Lawson were close. Everyone on campus knew that. She left early. Her daughter had... something. Something with her daughter. Meredith Lawson pressed her palms flat against the concrete, as if testing whether the ground was still solid. "I said I'd get a cab. I was going to get a cab." "Okay, that's fine. Let me call you one." Darnell pulled out his phone, but before he could open the app, she lurched forward, and he had to drop it to catch her by the elbow. She smelled like white wine and cold air and the fading ghost of some perfume he couldn't name. She was, he realized, far more intoxicated than he'd first thought. Not stumbling drunk. Beyond that, the kind of drunk where the body starts making decisions the brain has already abandoned. He steadied her. She gripped his forearm with both hands, and her fingers were so cold they felt like something that had been left in a freezer. Darnell looked around one more time. The parking lot. Dark building. The empty street beyond the gate. Not a single person anywhere. Here is the thing about moments like these. Later, people will ask why he didn't just call a cab and wait for it to arrive. They'll ask why he didn't phone campus security. They'll say he should have gone back inside, found a warm room, and let someone else deal with it. And those are all reasonable things to say from the comfort of a kitchen table, days later, with hot coffee and full knowledge of how the story ends. They are less reasonable at -19, in a parking lot with a woman who cannot stand on her own, whose phone is dead, who is 15 minutes from a medical emergency, and whose eyes keep drifting shut. He called a cab. Estimated arrival, 42 minutes. Ottawa on a Friday night in January. Everyone wanted to be somewhere warm. He called campus security. No answer. The automated system told him to leave a message or call 911 for emergencies. He considered 911. He stood there with his phone in one hand and Meredith Lawson's elbow in the other, and he considered it seriously. An ambulance would come. They'd take her. Problem solved. But she wasn't injured. She was drunk and cold, and in his experience, calling paramedics for a drunk white woman sitting next to a black man in a dark parking lot at midnight tended to introduce more problems than it solved. He had lived in this country long enough to know that the first question wouldn't be, "Is she okay?" The first question would be, "What are you doing with her?" He could leave, that was the other option. Walk to his car, drive to Angela's, pick up his daughter, go home. Nobody would know. In the morning, Meredith Lawson would be someone else's problem. Or she would have sobered up enough to find her way home. Or she'd be found at 6 a.m. by the morning grounds crew, blue-lipped and stiff, and he'd spend the rest of his life knowing he walked away. Okay, Darnell said, not to her. To himself, to whatever internal arithmetic was running the numbers on his future. Okay. He picked up her purse, gathered the scattered contents, and helped her to his car. He should not have done this. He knew that then, and he would know it more clearly later. But knowing something is a mistake and knowing what else to do are two different kinds of knowing, and in that moment, only one of them had any weight. His apartment was 11 minutes away, in a low rise on MacArthur near the Vanier Parkway. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that got good morning light, and a wall in the hallway covered with Wren's drawings, houses with smoke curling from chimneys, horses that looked like dogs, family portraits where Darnell was always the tallest figure and always smiling. Though in real life he wasn't sure, he smiled as much as his daughter believed he did. He pulled into his parking spot and looked at Meredith Lawson in the passenger seat. She was asleep, not unconscious, he checked, breathing steady, color coming back to her face now that the heater had been running. He sat there for a full minute, engine idling, weighing it. Then he picked up his phone, opened the voice memo app, and hit record. It's 12:14 a.m., Saturday, January 18th. My name is Darnell Clark. I work at the university as custodial supervisor. I'm in my car outside my apartment. Dr. Meredith Lawson, my department head, is in the passenger seat. She was intoxicated and alone in the Laurier House parking lot. I couldn't reach anyone, and the cab wait was over 40 minutes. I'm bringing her inside to warm up. She'll sleep in Wren's room. I'll sleep on the couch. Nothing inappropriate has happened or will happen. He paused, added, Wren is at Angela's. I'm going to pick her up once Dr. Lawson is settled. He saved the recording. It wasn't much. He knew that. A voice memo wouldn't stop a rumor, wouldn't rewrite a headline, wouldn't undo whatever story someone might choose to tell. But it was something, a timestamp, a record. The only shield he had. Getting Meredith Lawson from the car to the apartment took 10 minutes. She was semi-conscious, cooperative but vague, like someone being guided through a dream they'd already started forgetting. He kept his hands visible. Under her elbow, on her back, nowhere else. Even though there was no one watching. Habit. The kind of habit a black man in Canada learns not from any single incident, but from the accumulation of 1,000 small signals over a lifetime, each one saying the same thing: you will not be given the benefit of the doubt. He brought her to Wren's room. The bed had a quilt with cartoon owls on it and a stuffed moose named Harold that Wren had slept with every night since she was 3. Darnell's set Meredith on the edge of the bed, pulled off her remaining shoe, a black heel with a strap that had left a red line across her ankle, and placed a glass of water on the nightstand. He found a pair of his own sweatpants and a clean t-shirt and set them on the chair by the door. Not beside her. On the chair, 6 feet away. "There are clothes on the chair if you want to change," he said, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. "Bathrooms across the hall. I'll be in the living room." She murmured something that might have been thank you and might have been nothing. He closed the door. Then he drove to Angela's. Angela Reed was 63 and had lived in the unit below Darnell's since before he moved in. She was Trinidadian. She was retired from the federal government. She had no children of her own, and she treated Wren as if the girl were her personal project. When Darnell knocked at 12:40, Angela opened the door already wearing the expression she kept for occasions when he was later than promised. "She's asleep," Angela said. "Has been since 10. I gave her the leftover roti." "Angela, I'm sorry. 2 guys called in sick and then there was a situation. There is always a situation." But she said it without heat. She looked at him more carefully. "You okay?" "Yeah, fine. Long night." Angela was not a woman who required explanations. She helped him carry Wren, still sleeping, limp and heavy the way only sleeping children can be, up the stairs and into the apartment. They put her on Darnell's bed. His bed, because Wren's bed was occupied. Angela glanced down the hallway toward Wren's closed door. She had ears like a bat and instincts like a detective. "You have company?" Darnell hesitated, then told her. All of it. The parking lot, the cold, the dead phone, the voice memo. Angela listened with her arms crossed and her face unreadable, and when he finished, she said, "Lord Jesus, Darnell, I know! You should have called me!" And said, "What?" "Angela, I'm bringing my drunk boss to your apartment at midnight?" "Yes." "That is exactly what you should have said. Because if that woman wakes up in a strange man's apartment with no memory of how she got there, you think she's going to check for voice memos?" Darnell didn't answer. He didn't need to. Angela shook her head, said "Lord Jesus" one more time for emphasis, and went back downstairs. He slept on the couch. Or didn't sleep, really. He lay on the couch with the cushion that always smelled faintly of popcorn, and he stared at the ceiling and he listened. He listened for sounds from Wren's room, movement, footsteps, the particular silence that would mean she was awake and trying to piece together where she was. He heard nothing. The apartment settled around him. The fridge hummed. A snowplow scraped past on MacArthur, its blade throwing sparks against the asphalt. Somewhere in the building, a pipe knocked twice and went quiet. He thought about Wren's ski trip. He thought about the overtime pay he'd just earned. He thought about the look on his daughter's face when she saw the new ski pants, the ones she'd pointed out in the Canadian Tire flyer with the seriousness of a child requesting something she already knew was too expensive. He thought about all the small, ordinary things that made up the life he had built in this apartment, in this city, in this cold and mostly decent country, and he thought about how quickly all of it could be unmade by a single sentence spoken by the wrong person to the wrong ear. He slept, eventually. 40 minutes, maybe. He dreamed about parking lots. The sound that woke him was not from Wren's room. It was from his own bedroom. Wren was awake. "Daddy?" She was standing in the hallway in her pajamas, the ones with the little foxes, holding Harold the moose by one antler. Her hair was pressed flat on one side from sleeping. "Hey, Peanut. Good morning. Why did I sleep in your bed? Because we have a guest in your room." Wren considered this with the seriousness of a Supreme Court justice weighing precedent. "Who?" "Someone from Daddy's work. She wasn't feeling well last night, so she's resting." "Oh," Wren padded into the kitchen. "Can I have Cheerios?" "Yeah, let me get them." He poured her cereal. She sat at the table and ate with the methodical focus she brought to everything. Each Cheerio speared individually on her spoon, then delivered to her mouth with ceremony. Darnell started the coffee maker. Saturday morning. Ordinary. Except for the woman asleep in his daughter's owl quilt bed. The coffee maker was still dripping when he heard the door open. Meredith Lawson stood in the hallway. She was wearing the sweatpants he'd left on the chair and the t-shirt, an old Raptors shirt, faded at the collar. She must have changed at some point in the night. Her hair was tangled. Her makeup had migrated to places makeup was not meant to be. She was holding the doorframe with one hand, and she was looking at Darnell with an expression he'd seen before, on other faces, in other contexts, but never directed at him quite this specifically. Fear. Not confusion, not embarrassment. Fear. Her eyes moved from Darnell to the apartment around her. The drawings on the wall, the small shoes by the door, the cereal box on the counter, the child sitting at the table. They moved back to Darnell, to the sweatpants she was wearing. His sweatpants. "Where am I?" she said. "My apartment. MacArthur Avenue, Vanier. You're safe." "What?" She stopped. Swallowed. "What happened? You were at the faculty party last night. You had a lot to drink. I found you outside in the parking lot after everyone left. -19, no coat, your phone was dead. I couldn't get you a cab, 42-minute wait, and I couldn't reach anyone. I brought you here. You slept in my daughter's room. I slept on the couch." He delivered this in the calm, factual voice he used when explaining building maintenance reports to administrators who didn't want to hear about building maintenance. No emotion, just data. He needed her to hear the data before anything else reached her. Meredith Lawson heard him. Whether she believed him was a different question. Her hand had not left the doorframe. Her knuckles were white. "I need my phone," she said, "on the nightstand. It was dead last night. There's a charger plugged in next to the lamp." She went back into the room. Darnell stood at the counter, and the coffee maker finished its cycle, and the apartment was very quiet except for the sound of Wren's spoon clinking against her bowl. Through the closed door, he could hear a voice. Meredith's. She had found enough charge to make a call. He couldn't make out words, but he could hear tone. The tone was urgent, thin, controlled. The voice of a woman delivering information she hadn't yet decided was true. Darnell poured himself coffee. His hands were steady. He was surprised by that. Wren looked up from her cereal. "Is the lady okay, Daddy?" "She's fine, Peanut. She's just making a phone call. She looks scared. Sometimes people feel confused when they wake up somewhere new. It's normal. Like when I slept at Angela's the first time and I cried. Exactly like that." Wren returned to her Cheerios. Then, with the abrupt topic changes only a 7-year-old can execute without warning, "Daddy, can we make pancakes? Maybe in a bit." In Wren's room, the voice had stopped. Darnell heard footsteps. The door opened again. Meredith Lawson stood there with her phone in her hand, and now her expression had changed. The fear was still there, but something else had layered over it. Something harder. She had been talking to someone. Someone who had given her a framework for what she was experiencing, and the framework did not include the version of events Darnell had described. "My friend Sheena is coming to get me," she said. "Okay, she'll be here in 20 minutes. That's fine. Do you want some coffee while you wait?" Meredith looked at the coffee, at Darnell, at the kitchen, at the child, toned. She opened her mouth, and Darnell could feel the next sentence forming, could feel its shape and weight before it arrived. And he understood, with the clarity of a man who has spent his entire adult life reading rooms for danger, that the next 30 seconds were going to decide the rest of his life. "Meredith," he said. First time he'd ever used her first name. "Before your friend gets here, I want you to know there's a voice memo on my phone, time-stamped 12:14 a.m. That explains everything. I recorded it before I brought you inside. I also want you to know that my neighbor Angela downstairs saw me bring you in and saw me leave to pick up my daughter. And I slept on the couch." Meredith stared at him. "You recorded a voice memo?" "Yes, before you brought me in." "Yes, why would you do that?" Darnell set down his coffee cup. He didn't look away from her. "Because I knew exactly how this would look in the morning, and I knew that no one would ask me for my side first." Something shifted in her face. Not softening, exactly. Something closer to recognition. The involuntary flinch of someone who has just been shown a mirror they didn't request. She looked at the sweatpants she was wearing. looked at the chair across the room where he'd placed them, 6 feet from the bed, looked at the untouched glass of water on the nightstand. And then Wren slid off her chair, walked over, and looked up at Meredith Lawson with the unfiltered directness of a child who has not yet learned that some truths are dangerous. "Do you want some Cheerios? Daddy always makes me Cheerios when I don't feel good. And sometimes he makes soup, but it's morning, so probably Cheerios is better." Meredith looked down at the girl, at the fox pajamas and the tangled hair and the moose dangling by one antler, at the drawings on the fridge, the houses, the horses, that were-dogs, the family portraits where Daddy was always tallest and always smiling. Meredith's voice caught. "No, thank you, sweetheart." "Okay, but if you change your mind, the honey ones are really good." Wren went back to the table. The apartment was quiet. The fridge hummed. Outside, a city bus ground its gears on MacArthur, the sound so familiar it was almost silence. Meredith picked up her phone, dialed. Darnell listened, and this time he heard the words. "Sheena. Yeah, it's me. Listen, I'm okay. I'm fine. No, listen. He has a daughter. He slept on the couch. He even made a recording before he brought me in. He recorded the whole thing to protect himself because he knew because he knew no one would believe him. No, don't. Sheena, I'm telling you, nothing happened. Nothing happened. Another pause, longer this time. I know. But I'm telling you what I see. And what I see is a man who gave up his daughter's bed and slept on a couch and recorded a voice memo at midnight because he was more afraid of me than I was of him." She hung up. The silence that followed was not comfortable. It was not the warm, redemptive silence of a movie. It was the silence of two people standing in a small kitchen in Vanier, one of them in borrowed sweatpants, the other holding a coffee cup with a chip on the rim, both of them aware that they had just walked to the edge of something that could not be unwalled. "I'm sorry," Meredith said. "You don't need to be sorry." "Yes, I do. I woke up and my first thought was, I know what your first thought was." She looked at him, and for the first time there was no fear in her face. Something else. Something harder to name. Shame. Maybe. Or the beginning of understanding, the kind that arrives not through argument but through a child offering Cheerios in fox pajamas at 8 in the morning. Sheena arrived 18 minutes later. A small woman with box braids and sharp eyes who looked at Darnell like she was memorizing his face for a police sketch. He didn't blame her. He offered her coffee. She declined. She took Meredith's arm and guided her to the door. And Meredith turned back once, and Darnell nodded, and that was that. He closed the door, locked it, stood with his forehead against the wood for a moment. Then he went to the kitchen, sat down across from his daughter, and said, "Now, tell me about these pancakes." Monday came the way Mondays do, indifferently, without regard for what happened over the weekend. Darnell went to work. He supervised the morning cleaning rotation. He checked the supply inventory. He replaced a fluorescent tube in the third-floor women's washroom. He did not see Meredith Lawson. He didn't see her Tuesday either, or Wednesday. By Thursday, he had started to wonder if the silence was a good sign or the quiet before something institutional and devastating. A meeting with HR, a letter, a security escort to the parking lot with his personal items in a cardboard box. On Friday, he found an envelope in his department mailbox, internal mail. No return name, but the handwriting was careful, deliberate. The handwriting of someone who had drafted the message more than once. Inside was a single sheet. University letterhead. 3 sentences. "Thank you for what you did. I'm sorry for what I almost did. Your daughter is lucky." No signature. She didn't need one. Conned. That afternoon, his supervisor called him into the office to tell him that the custodial department's budget request for new floor equipment had been approved. The full amount, which never happened, not once in the 4 years Darnell had been submitting it. His supervisor seemed as surprised as he was. "Somebody upstairs must like you," she said, and Darnell said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would fit inside the shape of what had actually happened. He picked up Wren from after school that day. She ran to him the way she always did, backpack bouncing, Harold the moose hanging out of the top zipper. In the car, she told him about her day, a disagreement about crayons, a substitute teacher who let them have extra recess, the ongoing saga of whether Ava or Brooklyn had the better lunch. "Daddy?" she said, somewhere on the Vanier Parkway. "Yeah? Is the lady from Saturday feeling better?" "Yeah, Peanut. She's feeling better. Good." Wren nodded with satisfaction. "Cheerios help." Darnell looked at his daughter in the rearview mirror, at the fox pajamas she'd outgrow by spring, at the face that was equal parts her mother and himself, though her mother was a story for another day, at the absolute certainty in her eyes, the certainty that Cheerios help, that Daddy is good, that the world operates by rules she hasn't yet had reason to doubt. He had spent his whole life building armor, voice memos and witnesses, and the careful, exhausting geometry of making sure he was never alone in a room with the wrong person, never standing too close, never speaking too loudly, never giving anyone a reason to reach for the story that was always waiting in the back of their minds. He had believed that safety lived in caution, in smallness, in never putting himself in a position where he could be misunderstood. And maybe that was true. Maybe the voice memo had saved him. Maybe Angela's testimony would have mattered. Maybe the logistics of self-preservation were, in fact, the reason he still had his job and his apartment and his daughter and his name. But he didn't think so. He thought it was the Cheerios. Now let me ask you something, and I mean this. If you'd been standing in that parking lot at -19, if you'd seen her sitting there with one shoe and a dead phone and nobody coming, what would you have done? Would you have called 911 and walked away clean? Would you have waited 42 minutes for a cab that might not come? Would you have done the math on your own life and decided the numbers didn't add up? Or would you have done what Darnell did, the dangerous thing, the stupid thing, the thing that no sensible person would advise, and helped anyway? Because here's what I keep thinking about. Darnell Clark didn't save Meredith Lawson because he was brave. He wasn't brave. He was terrified. He saved her because his daughter was always watching, even when she wasn't in the room, even when she was asleep at Angela's, even when she was 6 years old and didn't know what a false accusation was or why her father recorded voice memos in parking lots at midnight. She was always watching. And he wanted to be the man she already believed he was. If you have someone watching you like that, a child, a friend, a person you can't bear to disappoint, then maybe you understand. And if you don't, well, maybe this story is the closest you'll get, and maybe that's enough to keep trying.